Do you really believe that God exists? And I don't mean the version of God you were told about as a kid. Not what your parents said or what your culture expected. Not even the image that society shaped and handed to you. I'm talking about that feeling, that thought that creeps in when you're truly alone, in the silence, when nothing is working and your mind just drifts towards something beyond words. Have you ever had that moment where it wasn't about praying or following a ritual, but something deep inside you quietly asked, is anyone out there? A presence, an awareness, not visible, not definable, but somehow strangely felt. It's weird, isn't it? How even the most skeptical people, when things fall apart, whisper things like, please help me. But who are they talking to? If there's no one up there, why do we do that? Is it just instinct, a psychological reflex? Or maybe there's a part of us that always reaches for something beyond ourselves? What if no one had ever told you the word God? Would you still feel that something was missing from the picture? That life, the universe, everything should have some kind of meaning behind it? Or would it all just be a random mess of atoms, colliding for no reason, going nowhere, with no one listening? Why are we so desperate to be heard? Why do we need someone, anyone, to understand us, to witness our pain, to give us a sense of direction? Is that just some leftover part of evolution? Or is it a signal that maybe there's something on the other side? There's a psychologist named Jordan Peterson who approaches this question in a very unusual way. Have you ever come across someone whose words feel like they cut through the noise? Not because they're loud, but because they come from a place of deep thought? That's Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist, a professor, a controversial public intellectual. But more than any of these labels, he's someone who asks the hard questions most people avoid. Peterson didn't become globally known because he told people what they wanted to hear. In fact, it's quite the opposite. His rise came from challenging popular opinions, questioning ideologies, deconstructing modern values, and defending the importance of individual responsibility. Whether you agree with him or not, there's no denying that his ideas have sparked countless conversations around the world. But what makes him different from the usual voices in philosophy or religion? It's this. Peterson bridges science, psychology, mythology, and theology in a way that very few thinkers do. He doesn't just ask, does God exist? He dives into how the very idea of God shapes our minds, cultures, and choices. For him, belief isn't just about religion. It's about how we live, how we suffer, and how we strive for meaning. His lectures often pull from ancient stories, like those in the Bible, but he doesn't preach. He interprets. He explores. He makes these old narratives feel like they're speaking directly to our struggles today. It's not about converting anyone. It's about understanding why these stories still matter in the age of science and reason. And that's exactly why people listen. Even those who disagree with him often admit he makes them think. In a world full of quick opinions and shallow takes, that alone makes him worth paying attention to. So when someone like Peterson talks about God, he's not just offering a religious answer. He's dissecting an idea that's been shaping humanity for thousands of years, one psychological layer at a time. Let's take a step away from traditional religious debates for a moment. Forget theology, forget doctrine. Let's ask a different question. What does the idea of God do to the human mind? And this is exactly the kind of question Jordan Peterson likes to explore. You see, Peterson doesn't argue for or against God in the usual way. He's not standing on a pulpit telling you what to believe. Instead, he looks at how belief, any belief, shapes the way we act, the way we think, the way we feel. And for him, the idea of God is not just about a supernatural being in the sky. It's about something deeply rooted in the human psyche. He often says, you act as if God exists, even if you don't think he does. Strange, right? But think about it. Why do people feel guilty when they lie, even if no one's watching? Why do we feel the weight of our choices like someone or something is keeping score? That's not logic. That's psychology. Peterson argues that the idea of God is embedded in our moral structures. It's the voice in our head that tells us, you know this is wrong. It's a standard we measure ourselves against. Not just because religion taught it, but because our minds are wired to look for something higher something transcendent, even if we can't name it. And here's where it gets fascinating. When people lose that sense of higher meaning or ignore it, Peterson believes chaos often follows. Anxiety rises. Depression creeps in. Life starts to feel pointless. It's not necessarily that God fixes everything, but that the belief in something greater than yourself gives structure to suffering. It gives purpose to pain. And in Peterson's view, that's not just spiritual, that's psychological survival. He draws a lot from Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist who saw God not just as a religious figure, but as a powerful archetype within the human unconscious. Something symbolic, something timeless. And Peterson builds on that. When you ignore that archetype, you don't just become less religious, you risk becoming disoriented in life. So when Peterson talks about God, he's not necessarily talking about a man with a beard in the sky. He's talking about the inner compass, the part of us that says, there's more to this world than just what you can see. Whether or not God exists out, there's a question for theologians. But what Peterson is asking is more personal. What happens to us when we stop acting like there's something greater than ourselves? What kind of person do we become? And can we really bear the full weight of life without something to hold on to? Maybe belief isn't just about religion. Maybe it's about survival, psychological, emotional, existential survival. And that is why Peterson believes the question of God isn't just philosophical. It's deeply personal. Let's just imagine for a moment. We take God out of the picture. No more divine laws. No more sacred meaning. No higher purpose whispered to us from the heavens. What's left? Some people might say, well, we have science now. We don't need old myths. Sure, science explains a lot. It tells us how things work. But it doesn't really tell us why we should get out of bed in the morning. It doesn't help when you're staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m. wondering what the point of it all is. It doesn't comfort a grieving mother or help a teenager who's drowning in anxiety and feels invisible. So, if we delete God, what do we put in his place? Money? Power? Pleasure? Have we really thought about what fills that vacuum? Because something always does. For some, it's ideology. They wrap their identity around a cause, a flag, a belief system. It gives them purpose, but also can turn dangerous. History has shown that when people lose their faith in God, they often put their faith in human idols instead. Political leaders, social movements, or even themselves. And that kind of worship, it's fragile. It can turn dark, fast. Others turn to success. Achievement becomes their new god. They work 14-hour days. They burn out. They chase numbers, promotions, likes, followers. And yet in quiet moments, many still feel empty. Why? Because success doesn't love you. It doesn't see you. It doesn't forgive you. Then there's pleasure. Escape. Drown it all out with entertainment, dopamine, distractions. But that works only until the silence creeps back in. And when it does, it's louder than ever. Without a sense of something bigger, we risk becoming too small. We start to believe that we are the center of the universe, that our emotions, our opinions, our desires should be the ultimate guide. But can we really trust ourselves that much? Can we build a life, a society, a future on nothing more than how I feel right now? That's the real danger of removing God. Not fire and brimstone, but emptiness. A hunger for meaning that can't be filled with stuff or praise or theories. And deep down, we know this. That's why we keep searching. That's why people still light candles, still whisper prayers, still look up at the stars, and ask questions no textbook can answer. So the question isn't just, do you believe in God? It's, what do you believe in when things fall apart? Because something always takes God's place. The only question is, what kind of God are you serving? Some might say that without God, we're finally free. But history whispers something else, something darker. When God disappears from a society, people don't just float freely in a sea of reason and peace. They look for substitutes, and the replacements they find are often far more dangerous than the belief they abandoned. In Stalin's Soviet Union, God was replaced by the state. The regime became the ultimate authority. Loyalty wasn't just expected, it was demanded. Churches were destroyed, clergy imprisoned or executed. The result wasn't liberation. It was one of the most oppressive systems in history. The absence of a higher moral authority didn't lead to justice. It led to mass purges, fear, and forced conformity. Then there's Mao's China. The Cultural Revolution wasn't just about politics. It was spiritual. Mao was portrayed as a near-divine figure. His little red book replaced scripture. Children turned against their parents, temples were desecrated, and any trace of old moral systems was burned. They tried to erase the soul of a nation in the name of progress. But what filled the vacuum was blind obedience and unspeakable violence. In Nazi Germany, Hitler became the object of worship. Traditional religion was sidelined or co-opted. The state dictated morality, and the results were catastrophic. Millions murdered. The conscience of a people rewritten to serve a twisted ideology. It didn't happen overnight. It started with removing a moral compass and replacing it with a man-made one. And then there's Iran. Ironically, in a country where God is always on the lips of those in power, he has become a tool rather than a guide. Instead of freeing the people through faith, religion has been weaponized. The name of God is used to justify control, silence dissent, and preserve authority. When belief is corrupted by politics, it no longer uplifts, it oppresses. So the lesson is clear. When God is removed, something always takes his place. Whether it's the state, a leader, or a twisted ideology, the human heart doesn't stay empty. And when we pretend we can live without a deeper moral anchor, history shows we usually find ourselves worshiping something far worse. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered why, even in the most secular societies, the idea of God never really disappears? You might hear people say they don't believe in God, but they still talk about fate, karma, justice, inner peace, or even the universe as if it's listening. Why? Because the concept of God is more than just religion. It's an archetype. And archetypes never die. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, believed that certain symbols live deep within our unconscious minds, what he called the collective unconscious. These are not just ideas passed down culturally, but universal patterns that shape the way we think, feel, and behave. Among them, the image of God is one of the most powerful. So when we talk about God, not necessarily the old man in the sky or a specific religious figure, we're really talking about something deeper. We're talking about the embodiment of meaning, morality, order, and transcendence. Whether you believe in a deity or not, the idea of God helps the human mind orient itself towards something higher. Think about what happens when this archetype disappears from a culture. When there's no longer an image of something greater than ourselves, something that holds us accountable, fills us with awe, or represents the highest good, we don't become freer. We become lost. You see, the archetype of God isn't just a symbol of power or control. It's a psychological structure that keeps the chaos of life from overwhelming us. It gives people a center, a moral compass, a reason to endure suffering, a way to make sense of pain. Even in therapy, Jung would sometimes encourage patients to explore their own relationship with this archetype, not to push religion, but to restore meaning. And it's not just in the West. Across every ancient civilization, Egyptian, Greek, Persian, Hindu, Aztec, there's always been some version of a higher being. Why? Because without that structure, human beings spiral. We look for it elsewhere, in ideologies, celebrities, science, or even politics, but none of them can truly replace the psychological depth of the archetype of God. Jordan Peterson once said, "We need a central figure to aim toward, or the world fragments into meaningless chaos." That figure doesn't have to be defined by traditional religion, but we all need something that represents the highest possible ideal, something to strive for. Without it, there's no direction, just noise. You might say, well, I could be my own God. And sure, self-empowerment is great, but you're still using the structure. You're still imagining a better, wiser version of yourself, an ideal, a guide, a judge. That's the God archetype at work, even if you don't call it that. Here's the real danger. When societies erase the archetype completely, what comes in its place is often worse. History shows us again and again. When we kill God, we tend to replace him with ideology, with cults of personality, with utopian fantasies that turn into nightmares. And individuals? They often fall into nihilism, addiction, and despair. So maybe the question isn't, do you believe in God, but rather, what image of the highest possible good do you carry inside you? And how does that guide your life? Because whether we like it or not, we're wired for worship. We're drawn to what we place at the top of our value hierarchy. The only real choice we have is this. Do we aim for something that elevates us or something that destroys us? The archetype of God is not outdated. It's essential, not because it gives us all the answers, but because it reminds us to keep asking the right questions. Let me ask you something. What does it mean to believe in God? Is it about reciting prayers, going to church or mosque? Or is it something deeper, something that shapes the way you see pain, meaning, sacrifice, and even death? Now, let's talk about Jordan Peterson. When people ask him, "Do you believe in God?" he often pauses, looks away, and then responds with something like, "I try to live as if God exists." What kind of answer is that? At first glance, it sounds evasive, like he's dodging the question. But if you followed Peterson long enough, you realize he's not avoiding anything. He's wrestling with the question itself. Because for him, belief isn't about mere words. It's not about saying yes or no. It's about how you act, how you live, how you carry the weight of suffering in a broken world. To Peterson, belief in God is a responsibility, not a comfort. He often refers to the idea of God as the ultimate ideal, the highest possible good. And if that's true, if God is the symbol of ultimate order, truth, and beauty, then to live as if God exists means to align your life with those values. To speak truth even when it hurts. To carry your cross, even if you don't fully understand why. So does he believe? He cries when he talks about God. His voice breaks. His eyes water. That's not performance. That's struggle. That's the tension between intellect and soul. He's a man trying to bridge the ancient with the modern, science with myth, logic with the sacred. Peterson himself has said, "I'm afraid he might exist." And in that fear, there's awe, there's humility, there's a recognition that if God does exist, everything matters more. Every word, every action, every lie, every truth. He's not giving you easy answers because life isn't easy. He's showing you how to wrestle with doubt honestly, how to live with reverence, even if your faith is filled with cracks. You see, in today's world, people want quick answers, black or white, believe or don't. But Peterson operates in the gray. He knows belief isn't a switch, it's a path, a tension, a burden, and maybe even a salvation. So, does Jordan Peterson believe in God? I think he wants to. I think he's terrified not to. And more importantly, I think he lives like someone who knows that if God does exist, then nothing is trivial. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most honest kind of belief there is. When most people hear the word God, they probably think of absolute power, miracles, or maybe reward and punishment. But what Jordan Peterson and many psychologists emphasize is something deeper, that God is more than a being or force. God is an idea, and that idea plays a crucial role in human life. And that role is personal responsibility. Why? Because believing in God means believing in a higher law, an order beyond you and me, a structure we're supposed to align with. This order tells us that life is more than just passing days. Life means striving to be better. It means carrying the heavy burden of choices and decisions. Peterson often says, responsibility means taking on the burden of life, not running from it. And that burden becomes heavier and more meaningful when you believe in God. Because you don't just live for yourself, you live for something greater. But here's the question. Do we have to believe in God to be responsible? We know many people live responsible lives without religious belief. So is belief in God necessary? That's the key point Peterson wrestles with. He doesn't say you must believe in God to be responsible. Instead, he says, if you don't believe in God, you have to replace that with something equally meaningful, something that connects you to higher values and order. If you don't believe your actions are overseen by a higher power, your motivations might shift. This is where the risk of irresponsibility or chaos appears. Without a strong moral framework, humans tend towards selfishness and comfort-seeking. In truth, God symbolizes that part of our psyche that knows life must have purpose. It must be valuable, and it must serve something beyond ourselves. This belief, whether in God or another grand ideal, helps us stand firm in hardship and make the right choices. But again, the question remains, who builds that framework if not God? Can we create it ourselves and carry life's heavy responsibilities? Peterson says this is incredibly difficult. Without that spiritual anchor, people often spiral into meaninglessness and dysfunction. On the other hand, believing in God isn't always easy. Many people live with doubt and struggle. They question God, especially during crises and suffering. Peterson himself talks about how faith is hard. He says real faith is living with doubt, not eliminating it. So believing in God doesn't mean having simple answers. It means living with complicated questions. And in the middle of this, personal responsibility gains deeper meaning because you have to choose, you have to strive, and you have to endure. To sum it up, belief in God helps you take responsibility more seriously. It connects you to values beyond yourself. But not believing in God isn't an excuse to avoid responsibility. If you don't believe in God, you must find something else to fill that spiritual and moral role. Otherwise, life becomes an endless sea of confusion, and responsibility risks drowning in the storm. What do you think? Do you believe that faith in God is necessary? Or can responsibility be achieved without religious belief? And if you don't believe in God, what would replace that to give your life meaning? So, here we are at the end of this thoughtful journey about God, belief, and responsibility. We've seen that God is not just a religious image, but an archetype, a deep psychological structure within our unconscious that plays a vital role in human life. We also learned that Jordan Peterson, one of today's most influential thinkers, views belief in God not merely as religious faith, but as a way of life and a serious responsibility. He shows us how belief in God can help give our lives meaning and make us take responsibility more seriously. At the same time, not believing in God is no excuse to avoid responsibility. Everyone needs to find meaning and value in life, even if that meaning comes outside of religious frameworks. Now, I want to ask you, what do you think? Does belief in God shape your sense of responsibility and purpose? Or do you believe it's possible to live a responsible, meaningful life without religious faith? Write your thoughts in the comments and continue this discussion with me and the community.